Eagle Creek Valley, Montana Territory. Winter of 1893. While his neighbors burned through cord after cord of firewood, one Swedish hunter sat comfortably in his cabin with no fire burning. The temperature outside had plunged to 31 degrees below zero. Inside his cabin, a steady 64 degrees. His secret wasn't magic. It wasn't some new-fangled invention. It was a technique so old, so simple, that when he first explained it, the local hunters called him insane. They laughed at his massive stone bed. They mocked his tiny woodpile. They predicted he'd freeze to death before January ended. They were wrong. What did this immigrant hunter understand about heat storage that experienced Montana frontiersmen had completely missed? And why did the same men who ridiculed him spend the following spring tearing apart their own cabins to copy his design? This is the story of how ancient knowledge, dismissed as primitive superstition, proved to be superior engineering under the harshest conditions imaginable. If you're interested in historical survival techniques that actually work, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Eagle Creek Valley, Montana Territory. September 1892. The sound of pickaxe striking frozen earth echoed across the valley as Lars Vikström dug into the floor of his newly built cabin. His neighbors, gathering firewood for the approaching winter, paused their work to watch. What they saw made no sense. Vikström wasn't reinforcing his foundation. He wasn't digging a root cellar. He was excavating a rectangular pit, 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, directly where his bed should be. And he was digging deep, nearly 3 feet into the cabin floor. "That Swede's lost his mind," muttered James Bradley, a hunter who'd survived 15 Montana winters. "Man builds a decent cabin, then tears up the floor. Probably gonna flood come spring thaw." But Vikström wasn't finished. Over the next 2 weeks, he hauled river stones from Eagle Creek, hundreds of them. Smooth, rounded stones, each one carefully selected. He sorted them by size, fist size for the base layers, larger ones for thermal mass, flat ones for the sleeping surface. Neighbors estimated he'd moved 2,400 pounds of stone into that pit. The construction itself seemed backwards. Vikström built a fire chamber at one end of the pit, with a clay-lined tunnel running beneath the stone bed. He installed a chimney draft at the opposite end. The stones were laid in careful layers, with channels allowing hot air to circulate through the entire mass before exhausting. "Fire goes underneath where you sleep." Bradley's voice dripped with sarcasm. "That's not heating, that's suicide. Stone don't hold heat worth a damn anyway." While other families stockpiled 8 to 12 cords of split pine and Douglas fir, Vikström gathered kindling and small branches. His woodpile, by late October, wouldn't have lasted a conventional cabin through November. Martha Henderson, whose family cabin sat a quarter-mile downstream, voiced what everyone thought. "That man's gonna freeze. And we'll probably have to take him in come December. Charity case that he'll be." The Swedish hunter said little in response. His English remained halting. His explanations about baji and heated stone met with blank stares and dismissive waves. He simply continued his work, sealing the stone bed surface with clay mixed with sand, creating a smooth, sleeping platform. By the first week of November, when temperatures began dropping into the 20s at night, every cabin in Eagle Creek Valley had smoke rising from chimneys dawn to dusk. Every cabin except Vikström's. His chimney released a thin wisp of smoke for 3 or 4 hours each morning, then went cold. "Man's too stubborn to admit he's wrong," Bradley told the others at the trading post. "Mark my words, before Christmas, we'll find him frozen stiff on that fool stone bed of his." What none of them understood was that Vikström had spent every morning of October and early November heating that stone mass. 4 hours of hot fire daily, gradually raising the temperature of 2,400 pounds of river stone. The technique required patience, something frontier pragmatism rarely afforded. The real test was coming, and it would arrive sooner than anyone expected. Northern Sweden, winter of 1867. 25 years before Eagle Creek, a 12-year-old Lars Vikström had huddled inside a goatee, watching Sami reindeer herders prepare for a storm. The temperature outside had already dropped below zero. Inside the traditional dwelling, An old herder named Nils was building a fire, not in a hearth, not in a stove, but beneath a massive bed of stones. The fire is temporary, Nils had explained in Swedish, his weathered hands arranging kindling with practiced efficiency. The stone is permanent. Fire gives heat for hours. Stone gives heat for days. Young Lars watched as the herders heated the stone bed for the entire afternoon. As darkness fell and the fire was allowed to die, the stones continued radiating warmth. The family slept directly on the heated surface, separated only by layers of reindeer hide. Through a blizzard that lasted 3 days, they reheated the stones just once. Baji, Nils called it, the heated bed, a technique the Sami had perfected over centuries of Arctic survival. The physics were simple, though frontier Montana had seemingly forgotten them. Wood, when burned, releases its energy quickly, intense heat that dissipates rapidly through convection. Hot air rises, escapes, and is gone. A conventional fireplace might heat a room to 70 degrees while burning, but let that fire die, and within hours the cabin returns to ambient temperature. Stone operates differently. River stone, specifically the metamorphic and sedimentary varieties Vikström selected from Eagle Creek, possesses a specific heat capacity of approximately 0.2 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. Those 2,400 pounds of stone, heated to 200 degrees, stored roughly 96,000 BTUs of thermal energy. More critically, stone releases that energy slowly, through radiation, not convection. Radiant heat warms objects and bodies directly, rather than heating air that immediately escapes through cracks and gaps in cabin walls. A person sleeping on a 130-degree stone surface, insulated by blankets, experiences continuous warmth for 18 to 24 hours. But in Eagle Creek Valley, autumn 1892, this explanation met only skepticism. James Bradley, who'd built 7 cabins across Montana Territory, dismissed the entire concept. I've laid stone chimneys that went cold an hour after the fire died. Stone don't hold heat. That's just facts. This Swede's either lying or deluded. Bradley's experience wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. A chimney, with its thin walls and constant air draft, sheds heat rapidly. A massive stone bed, with minimal surface area relative to volume and no air movement, behaves entirely differently. Thermal mass follows the square cube law. As volume increases, surface area increases more slowly, reducing heat loss. Vikström tried explaining this, his broken English struggling with technical concepts. Stone, heavy. Heavy take long to warm. Long to warm, long to cool. Understand. I understand you're going to freeze, Bradley replied. And I understand that when you do, it'll prove that fancy European tricks don't work in real American wilderness. The irony escaped everyone. The Sami technique Vikström was replicating had sustained human life in conditions far harsher than Montana. Northern Sweden's winter temperatures regularly plunged to -40, with 6-month darkness. The Baji wasn't experimental. It was proven technology refined through generations of survival. By late November, Vikström's routine had become a curiosity, then a joke. Each morning, he'd build a fire in the chamber beneath his stone bed. The fire burned hot for 3 to 4 hours, flames channeled through the clay-lined tunnels, heating the stone mass from below. By mid-morning, he'd let the fire die completely. His neighbors, meanwhile, fed their fireplaces and stoves continuously. Morning fire to warm the cabin. Midday fire to cook. Evening fire to survive the night. Some kept fires burning around the clock, family members taking shifts to add wood. You counting as firewood? Someone asked Bradley in early December. Don't need to count. Can see it from here. Man's out maybe half a cord left. We've each burned through 3 already, and winter's barely started. What they couldn't see was the temperature inside Vikström's cabin. The stone bed, heated to approximately 200 degrees each morning, maintained a surface temperature above 100 degrees for over 20 hours. The radiant heat from that mass kept the entire 400-square-foot cabin at a comfortable 60 to 65 degrees, even as outside temperatures dropped into the single digits. The Swedish hunter slept soundly on his full stone bed, wrapped in wool blankets, his body absorbing steady radiant warmth through the night. No middle of the night wood runs. No frozen mornings. No constant fire tending. But conviction and mockery rarely respond to logic. They respond to crisis. And crisis was about to arrive in Eagle Creek Valley. Eagle Creek Valley, Montana Territory. October through December 1892. While neighboring families rose before dawn to split firewood, Lars Vikström spent his mornings differently. 3 hours after sunrise, he'd begin his heating cycle, a methodical process that looked wasteful to observers but was precisely calculated for thermal efficiency. The fire he built wasn't the typical frontier cabin fire. Vikström used small, intensely hot fires. He'd arrange kindling in a specific pattern within the fire chamber, a base layer of dry pine needles, then thumb-thick twigs in a crosshatch, topped with wrist-thick branches of dead Douglas fir. The arrangement allowed maximum airflow and complete combustion. Once lit, the fire burned fierce. Flames traveled through the clay-lined channels beneath the stone bed, heating the rock from below. Vikström would tend this fire carefully, adding small pieces of wood every 20 minutes, maintaining consistent temperature rather than creating the peaks and valleys of typical cabin heating. After 3 to 4 hours, when the stones had absorbed their thermal load, he'd let the fire die naturally. No water dousing, no smothering, just gradual cooling of the combustion while the stone mass continued absorbing residual heat from the chimney draft. Man burns hot and fast, then sits in the cold all day, observed Martha Henderson, watching smoke disappear from Vikström's chimney by mid-morning. Makes no sense. Our stove runs dawn to dusk, like the Lord intended. But the Henderson cabin and every other cabin in the valley operated on a fundamentally different heating principle. They were heating air constantly, fighting a losing battle against drafts, gaps, and the simple physics of convection. Warm air rose to the rafters, leaked through roof joints, and was replaced by cold air seeping through floor cracks and door gaps. Vikström's system worked opposite to this. His heated stone bed warmed him directly through radiation. The stone's thermal mass, once heated, released energy slowly and steadily. The cabin air temperature, as a secondary effect, stabilized between 60 and 65 degrees, not from active heating, but from radiant transfer from the stone to the cabin surfaces. By late October, when first frost hit the valley, the differences became measurable. James Bradley's family burned through approximately 40 pounds of firewood daily to maintain cabin comfort. The Henderson family, with a less efficient fireplace, consumed closer to 60 pounds daily. Vikström's consumption, carefully observed by skeptical neighbors, ran about 12 pounds daily during his morning heating cycle. He's supplementing, Bradley insisted. Probably got a stash nobody's seen. Or he's burning furniture when we're not looking. But the math was undeniable. By early December, Bradley's woodpile had diminished by roughly 2 cords. The Hendersons were down nearly 3 cords. Vikström had consumed perhaps a third of a cord, and his small pile of kindling and branches appeared barely touched. The Swedish hunter's daily routine had become predictable. Wake before dawn. Build the morning fire by first light. Tend the fire for 3 hours, sometimes 4 if temperatures had dropped below zero overnight. Let the fire die. Spend the day hunting, trapping, or doing cabin maintenance. Sleep warm on the stone bed through the night. No midnight wood runs. No shivering mornings waiting for the cabin to warm. No constant fire tending that kept frontier families trapped in their own homes. But skepticism runs deep in isolated communities. The fact that Vikström's technique worked didn't make his neighbors curious. It made them suspicious. Probably doesn't feel the cold, someone suggested. You know how those Europeans are. Different constitution. Or he's lying about how much wood he burns, another offered. Probably heats that thing all day and just banks the fire when he sees people coming. Martha Henderson had a different theory. Mark my words, that stone bed is going to crack come deep winter. All that heating and cooling. Stone will split right down the middle, probably start a fire that burns his whole cabin down. The warnings grew more dire as December progressed. Temperatures now regularly dropped into the teens at night. Every cabin showed constant chimney smoke. Every cabin except Vikstrom's, which still released its morning plume, then went silent. "Man's gonna freeze," Bradley repeated, now less as mockery and more as genuine prediction. No human being can survive Montana winter on 4 hours of fire per day. Physics don't work that way. But physics did work that way, just not the physics Bradley understood. The thermal mass principle Vikstrom employed was the same principle that kept the Earth's oceans warm, the same principle that made adobe buildings comfortable in desert climates, the same principle that had sustained human habitation in the Arctic for millennia. By Christmas week, when temperatures dropped to 5 below zero, every family in Eagle Creek Valley was burning firewood at unprecedented rates. The Henderson family had already cut into their reserve supply. Bradley's oldest son had started felling green timber out of desperation. Wood that burned poorly and created dangerous creosote buildup. Vikstrom, meanwhile, had perhaps half his original small woodpile remaining. "He'll be begging for charity by New Year's," predicted Bradley. "Pride cometh before a fall," and that Swedes got pride in abundance. Then January arrived, and with it, the kind of cold that ended arguments and exposed truth with brutal clarity. Eagle Creek Valley, Montana Territory, January 9th, 1893. The temperature began dropping on January 8th, an hour before sunset. By full darkness, it had reached 12 below zero. By midnight, 18 below. When Lars Vikstrom woke on the morning of January 9th, the mercury in his cabin thermometer read minus 24 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Inside, lying on a stone bed, he was comfortably warm. The stones beneath him still radiated heat from yesterday morning's fire. Surface temperature approximately 115 degrees, insulated from his body by wool blankets. He built his morning fire as usual. 3 hours of intense heat, channeled through the stone mass. By 9 o'clock, the fire had died. The temperature outside continued falling. A quarter-mile downstream, Martha Henderson woke to discover frost forming on the inside of her cabin walls. Her husband had kept the stove burning through the night, but the temperature inside their home had dropped to 42 degrees. He added more wood. The stove glowed red-hot. The cabin warmed to 58 degrees, then began dropping again as soon as he stopped feeding the fire. They burned 65 pounds of firewood that day. James Bradley's experience was worse. His fireplace, designed for heating efficiency, struggled against the severe cold. The stone chimney, exposed to exterior temperatures, acted as a heat sink, drawing warmth out of the cabin even as fire burned within. His family huddled near the hearth, wrapped in every blanket they owned, while the far corners of the cabin dropped below freezing. He burned 83 pounds of firewood on January 9th alone. By January 10th, the temperature had reached minus 28 degrees. By the morning of January 11th, minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 35 Celsius. The cold was the kind that made breathing painful, that froze spit before it hit the ground, that turned inadequately heated cabins into death traps. 11 families lived in Eagle Creek Valley that winter. 10 of them faced a genuine crisis. Wood consumption had doubled, then tripled. The Henderson family was now burning through 90 pounds daily, and their cabin still barely reached 55 degrees. Bradley's fireplace consumed over 100 pounds of wood per day, keeping the immediate hearth area survivable while the rest of the cabin remained dangerously cold. Children slept in layers of clothing, pressed against parents for warmth. Water buckets froze solid indoors. Food stores suffered frost damage. The constant fire tending left families exhausted, taking shifts through the night to prevent fires from dying and temperatures from plummeting. Then, on January 13th, something unprecedented happened. John Miller, whose cabin sat nearest to Vikstrom's, noticed something impossible. It was 7 in the evening. Outside temperature, minus 29 degrees. Miller's cabin, despite a roaring fire, registered 53 degrees. Vikstrom's chimney had released no smoke since 9 that morning. 10 hours with no fire. Miller wrapped himself in a buffalo hide coat and walked the 100 yards to the Swedish hunter's cabin. He knocked. Vikstrom answered promptly, wearing a simple wool shirt and trousers. Not even shivering. You got a fire going? Miller asked. No. Morning fire only. Could I come in? Just for a moment. Vikstrom stepped aside. The warmth hit Miller immediately. Not the dry, intense heat of a roaring fireplace, but a steady, encompassing warmth. He looked at his pocket thermometer. 64 degrees Fahrenheit. 10 hours after the fire had died. -29 outside. Miller approached the stone bed, held his hand 6 inches above the surface. The heat was unmistakable. He touched one of the stones briefly, hot enough to be uncomfortable for sustained contact. This shouldn't be possible, Miller said. Stone holds heat long time, Vikstrom replied. That night, Miller told the others. Some dismissed it. Bradley called him mistaken. But when temperatures remained below -25 for 6 consecutive days, desperation overcame skepticism. On January 16th, Martha Henderson knocked on Vikstrom's door. Her family's would supply, rationed carefully, might last another week. Could she see inside his cabin? He showed her, explained the heating cycle, demonstrated the surface temperature of the stones 18 hours after his morning fire, showed her his remaining wood supply, still sufficient for the rest of winter, even if temperatures stayed this cold. Henderson's husband came the next day. Then Bradley's son. Then Bradley himself, pride swallowed by necessity and curiosity. Each visitor saw the same thing. A comfortable cabin, maintained at 62 to 66 degrees, heated by a fire that burned only 3 to 4 hours each morning. A wood consumption rate roughly 13% of what conventional heating required. The Swedish hunter they'd mocked as foolish had survived the worst cold spell in recorded Eagle Creek Valley history, while using a fraction of the resources everyone else desperately consumed. And the cold wasn't finished. 3 more days of -20-degree temperatures followed. Then a brief warming to -10. Then another plunge to -26 on January 22nd. Through it all, Vikstrom's routine never changed. Morning fire, 3 hours of heating, comfortable warmth for 24 hours. Wood consumption that seemed mathematically impossible to those who witnessed it. By the time temperatures finally moderated in late January, the question had shifted from, is this real, to how does this work? And more importantly, can we build one? Eagle Creek Valley, Montana Territory. Late January 1893. James Bradley stood in Lars Vikstrom's cabin, thermometer in hand, trying to reconcile observation with belief. It was January 28th. The worst of the cold had passed, but temperatures still hovered near zero. Vikstrom's morning fire had died 6 hours earlier. The cabin temperature read 63 degrees. Show me the fire chamber, Bradley said. Vikstrom lifted the wool padding from one end of the stone bed, revealing the access point. Bradley peered inside with a lantern. The fire chamber was cold to the touch. No hidden coals, no smoldering embers, no secret heat source. Just clay-lined channels and river stone. Bradley placed his hand on the sleeping surface of the bed. The stone was warm, approximately 110 degrees. 6 hours after the fire had died. This violates everything I know about heating, Bradley admitted. No violation, Vikstrom replied. Just different understanding. What Bradley was confronting was the measurable difference between convective and radiant heating systems, though he lacked the vocabulary to express it. His fireplace heated air. Hot air rose, escaped, and was replaced by cold air in an endless cycle. To maintain 65 degrees in his cabin, he needed continuous combustion, a fire that never died. Vikstrom's system heated mass. The stones absorbed thermal energy during the morning fire, then released that energy slowly through radiation. The heat didn't rise and escape. It radiated in all directions, warming the cabin's surfaces, which in turn stabilized air temperature. The mathematics, though neither man could calculate them precisely, were striking. Bradley's fireplace, burning continuously, consumed approximately 90 pounds of Douglas fir daily during the January cold snap. That would contain roughly 630,000 BTUs of potential energy. His cabin, with poor insulation and constant air exchange, required roughly 550,000 BTUs daily to maintain marginal comfort. Heating efficiency, approximately 87%, but only while actively burning. Wikström's stone bed, heated for 3 hours daily, consumed approximately 15 pounds of wood, 105,000 BTUs of input energy. The stone mass, once heated, released stored energy continuously for 24 hours. Total thermal retention, approximately 96,000 BTUs, with minimal heat loss to drafts because radiant heat doesn't depend on air movement. The effective efficiency was impossible to calculate directly, but the comparative result was undeniable. Wikström achieved equivalent comfort using 1/6 the fuel. John Miller, who'd spent 15 years as a surveyor before moving to Montana, attempted a systematic comparison. Over 5 days in early February, he documented Wikström's cabin, average temperature 64 degrees. Wood consumption 73 pounds over 5 days. Fire duration per day, 3 to 4 hours. Bradley's cabin, average temperature 61 degrees. Wood consumption 440 pounds over 5 days. Fire duration per day, 18 to 20 hours. Henderson cabin, average temperature 58 degrees. Wood consumption 490 pounds over 5 days. Fire duration per day, 20 to 22 hours. The Swedes using 87% less wood than me, Bradley said, staring at Miller's figures. And his cabin's warmer. But the most compelling evidence wasn't numerical, it was experiential. On February 3rd, Bradley spent a night in Wikström's cabin at the Swedish hunter's invitation. He slept on the stone bed, separated from the heated surface by wool blankets and a thin mattress pad. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced in frontier heating. Not the blast furnace heat of sleeping near a fireplace, which left one side roasting and the other freezing. Not the up and down temperature swings of a wood stove that burned hot, then cooled, then required reloading. Instead, steady, encompassing warmth. His entire body, from shoulders to feet, experienced consistent temperature. The heat penetrated through the blankets without being uncomfortable. And most remarkably, when he woke in the night, the warmth remained constant. No fire burned. No stove glowed. Yet the comfort persisted. I've never slept warmer in 15 years of Montana winters, Bradley admitted the next morning. The experience converted him from skeptic to advocate. Within days, he'd begun his own excavation, a smaller version of Wikström's design, adapted to his existing cabin layout. Martha Henderson's husband started his own stone bed project the following week. Then John Miller. Then 3 more families, convinced not by explanation, but by measurable results. The technique's success created demand for Wikström's knowledge. He spent February and March consulting on designs, explaining stone selection, demonstrating fire chamber construction. His broken English proved less important than his practical demonstrations. The physics lessons emerged through practice. Why river stone worked better than quarried stone, heat cycling durability. Why the fire chamber needed specific dimensions, complete combustion, and efficient heat transfer. Why the sleeping surface should be slightly domed, even heat distribution and comfort. Why the chimney draft mattered, preventing smoke backup without excessive heat loss. By late February, when a final cold snap dropped temperatures to -15 degrees, 7 cabins in Eagle Creek Valley operated on stone bed heating systems. The wood consumption statistics for that week demonstrated the technique's value beyond argument. Traditional heating cabins average 85 pounds of wood daily. Stone bed cabins average 14 pounds of wood daily. And the stone bed cabins maintained higher average temperatures. The transformation wasn't merely practical, it was psychological. Families who'd spent winter as prisoners of their fireplaces, trapped in exhausting cycles of wood cutting, fire tending, and constant anxiety about fuel supplies, suddenly experienced frontier winter differently. They could let fires die. They could sleep through the night without fire duty shifts. They could venture outside for hunting or trapping without returning to frigid cabins. The stone beds, once heated, provided thermal security that conventional heating simply couldn't match. Bradley, standing in his own partially completed stone bed installation in early March, shook his head with grudging respect. "I called this man a fool," he said to Miller. "I told everyone his European tricks wouldn't survive real American winter. Turns out the only fool here was me, and everyone else who thought frontier experience trumped centuries-old knowledge." The admission represented more than personal humility. It marked a fundamental shift in how the Eagle Creek Valley community understood heating, survival, and the value of techniques that seemed strange only because they were unfamiliar. The Swedish hunter who'd been mocked 6 months earlier was now the valley's most sought-after consultant. And the weird trick that had invited ridicule had proven itself through the most honest judge possible: winter itself. Eagle Creek Valley, Montana Territory. Spring 1893 through 1897. The spring thaw of 1893 arrived in late March, and with it came a transformation that extended far beyond melting snow. 7 cabins in Eagle Creek Valley now contain stone bed heating systems, with 4 more under construction. The technique that had invited mockery the previous autumn had become the valley's most discussed innovation. Lars Wikström, the Swedish hunter who'd endured months of ridicule, found himself in unexpected demand. Families from neighboring valleys, hearing reports of the impossible, comfortable cabins heated with minimal firewood, made the journey to Eagle Creek to see for themselves. James Bradley, who'd been among the most vocal skeptics, now served as an unlikely evangelist. He brought visitors to his own cabin, showing them his partially completed stone bed installation and sharing consumption data with the zeal of a convert. "I burned 4.5 cords of wood last winter," Bradley told a family from Bitterroot Valley in April 1893. Wikström burned maybe half a cord. Same valley, same temperatures, warmer cabin. The numbers don't lie. But the legacy of the stone bed technique extended beyond simple fuel efficiency. The system fundamentally altered how frontier families experienced winter survival. Martha Henderson, documenting her family's first winter with a stone bed system in 1893 to 94, recorded observations that captured the broader impact. December 14th, 1893. Temperature outside 8 degrees. Inside cabin 65 degrees. Fire died at 9 this morning, has not been relit. John went hunting today, was gone 7 hours. Returned to warm cabin. Previously, winter hunting meant returning to frozen home, spending hours rekindling fire before comfort returned. The stone bed eliminates this hardship entirely. The psychological shift was as significant as the physical comfort. Frontier families, traditionally imprisoned by their heating systems during winter months, gained unprecedented freedom. Hunters could pursue game without anxiety about returning to frigid homes. Women could manage daytime activities without constant fire tending. Children could sleep through nights without parents maintaining fire watches. By late 1894, 17 cabins within a 50-mile radius of Eagle Creek had incorporated Wikström's design. The technique spread through demonstration rather than documentation. Few frontier settlers were literate enough for written instructions, but all could understand a working system when they saw one. Variations emerged as builders adapted the core principle to different circumstances. Some created smaller stone beds for single-person dwellings. Others built larger versions for multi-family cabins. A few innovative builders incorporated the heating channels into cabin walls, creating radiant wall systems that warmed entire structures. The most significant adaptation came from a Norwegian immigrant named Olaf Hendrickson, who'd settled near Missoula. Hendrickson, familiar with similar techniques from Scandinavia, modified Wikström's design by adding a second thermal mass, a stone bench near the cabin center. His morning fire heated both the bed and the bench, providing multiple radiant heat sources that improved overall cabin temperature distribution. The principle works anywhere you can gather stone and build a fire, Hendrickson wrote in a letter to relatives in Norway, one of the few written records from this period. "I have maintained 70-degree comfort through minus 25-degree weather using less wood in a week than I previously burned in a single day." The technique's success prompted questions about its origins. Wikström, when asked, credited the Sami herders of northern Sweden. But the fundamental principle, heating thermal mass rather than air, appeared independently across human cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries. Korean ondal systems, dating back over 2,000 years, channeled fire heat beneath stone or clay floors, heating entire homes through radiant transfer. Roman hypocaust systems used similar principles for public baths. Japanese airori pits, Native American heated stone techniques, even certain designs of Russian stoves, all exploited thermal mass for efficient heating. What frontier America had dismissed as weird or primitive was actually sophisticated engineering, proven across diverse climates and refined through countless generations. The winter of 1896 to 97 provided final validation. That season brought sustained cold that rivaled 1,893, temperatures below zero for extended periods, fuel-consuming weather that tested every heating system. The stone bed cabins, now numbering over 30 in western Montana, performed exactly as the technique promised. Families maintained comfort with minimal wood consumption while their neighbors struggled with conventional heating. By spring 1897, the stone bed technique had achieved something rare in frontier culture: complete acceptance. What began as one man's weird trick had become standard practice, the kind of innovation that seemed obvious in retrospect but revolutionary in context. Lars Vikström, who'd been called a fool for excavating his cabin floor 5 years earlier, received a different kind of recognition. When he died in 1904, not from cold, but from a hunting accident, his obituary in the Missoula newspaper included this line: "The Swedish hunter who taught Montana how to survive winter with wisdom rather than wood." The stone bed technique persisted in remote Montana cabins well into the 20th century. Even as commercial stoves became available, some families maintained their stone beds, recognizing that the ancient method provided comfort that modern convenience couldn't match. A few of these installations remained functional into the 1940s. The broader lesson extended beyond heating efficiency. Eagle Creek Valley's experience demonstrated a pattern repeated throughout human history: the dismissal of traditional knowledge as primitive, followed by crisis-driven rediscovery, followed by grudging recognition that ancient techniques often embodied sophisticated understanding. The Sami herders who'd perfected the baji through Arctic survival hadn't been primitive. They'd been engineers, solving complex thermal problems with available materials. The Korean builders who designed ondal systems weren't backward. They'd been innovators, creating radiant heating that modern architecture would later reinvent and celebrate. And Lars Vikström, the immigrant hunter mocked for his weird construction methods, hadn't been foolish. He'd been wise enough to recognize that survival techniques refined over centuries might contain knowledge worth preserving. James Bradley, reflecting on the experience in 1898, offered his own conclusion: "I spent 15 years in Montana thinking I knew winter. Took one Swede with a pile of stones to show me I knew nothing." The lesson isn't about heating. It's about the difference between experience and wisdom. Experience is what you learn yourself. Wisdom is what you're smart enough to learn from others, even when those others speak broken English and do things that seem crazy. The stone beds of Eagle Creek Valley represented more than efficient heating. They represented the kind of knowledge transfer that built civilizations. One culture's ancient wisdom, adapted to new circumstances, solving problems that seemed unsolvable with conventional approaches. Modern off-grid builders, rediscovering thermal mass principles in the 21st century, essentially reinvent what the Sami, the Koreans, the Romans, and Lars Vikström already knew: that stone, properly heated, provides comfort that fire alone cannot match. That radiant heat works better than convective heat for human comfort. That working with natural materials' properties produces better results than fighting against them. The weird trick that kept one hunter's cabin warm all winter without firewood wasn't weird at all. It was engineering. Ancient, proven, efficient engineering that worked in 1893 and would work today for anyone willing to look past the unfamiliarity and see the wisdom beneath. The stone beds are gone now, those specific installations lost to time and cabin decay. But the principle remains: waiting for each new generation to rediscover what the old generations never forgot, that the best solutions often aren't new inventions but old knowledge, adapted with respect and applied with understanding. And somewhere in the archives of Montana historical societies, there would consumption records from 1893, 87% less fuel for equivalent comfort, that still prove, in stark numerical terms, what Lars Vikström demonstrated and what his neighbors eventually learned. That dismissing traditional knowledge as primitive often reveals not their ignorance, but ours. If you found this story valuable, hit that like button, subscribe for more historical survival wisdom, and drop a comment telling us. What traditional techniques do you think modern builders have forgotten? Let's keep this knowledge alive.